Ben, is it okay if I call you Ben?
Please, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Ben, I'm Thomas. What's going
Hey,
on, man?
Thomas. Oh, not too much about you.
Just chilling, man. I love doing this stuff on the weekends. This is about as informal as it gets. You know what I'm saying? So you can cuss, you can do whatever you want. It doesn't matter.
Outstanding.
This is a free speech policy platform, so that's why we use it. It's still in beta, and we can tell because of these problems that we're having. Um, so just bear with us and stuff. How long do we have you tonight?
I think in the email you talked about like an hour. If that's still what you want to
Oh,
do.
that's perfect. That's fine with me.
Yep.
So let's get right into it. I usually do research on people before I talk to them, but I don't know if I want that to be what I'm doing before I talk to them, but I don't know if I want that to be what I'm doing from now on. I think I want to go in blind and just
Yeah, sure.
have a good dialectic back and forth. So I know one thing about you that I really love, and I'm going to say this first. Our friend Ben here is a writer. He's
Mhm.
also an adjunct professor of philosophy, and he also is a columnist.
Mhm.
Um, but he has a book. Would you give me the full title, the Christopher Hitchens book?
Yeah. Christopher Hitchens, what he got right, how he went wrong, and why he still matters. How he went wrong and why he still matters.
Right. So we were just talking a second ago about my idea of Christopher Hitchens and how I
Mm-hmm.
loved him. And we'll get into this more and we'll go back and talk about other things and tangent
Sure.
everywhere.
Yes.
But no, yeah, I was just saying Christopher Hitchens, I love him. I think he was a brilliant mind. I think he was a good journalist and writer and a literary critic. You know, probably know a lot about philology. Um, not the in all of his debates with the religion poisons
Yeah.
everything and how he dealt with his apologetic opponents and things like that. He's not a philosopher. You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
that's kind of the difference between him and other people who argue with apologists and stuff. And philosophy is my love, and
Mhm.
I loved his wit and everything, but I just never thought that he was making the really hard, decisive philosophical arguments. What do you think about all that?
Yeah, Hitchens is somebody who, part of the reason I wanted to write about him is that, reading him and watching him always meant a lot to me. Part of the reason I wanted to write about him is that, reading him and watching him always meant a lot to me. But I also have, I also have very mixed feelings. I think there's stuff that's tremendously positive there, and I liked a lot. And then he supported the Iraq War, right? I mean, I obviously
Right? Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that, right? Uh,
No.
and I even have, even in terms of what you're specifically asking about the new atheism period, right? Like I even, you know some of that is even a little bit complicated for me. So I wanted to kind of work through all of that and kind of think about what made the guy so compelling to me and and a lot of other people, and what was
Yeah.
sort of what was good there, what was bad, the whole picture. And in and yeah, I mean, I agree with what you're saying about the religion debates. I mean, there's a part of what he would do with those that I really like. There's a sort of humanistic moral critique of the you know well religion, and mostly Christianity, but to a certain extent, and like related monotheistic Western religions,
Mhm.
that he's making in a lot of those debates, that still resonates with me. I mean, I'm still largely on board with that, but I also think that there's a certain weird sense in which sometimes you're watching like an old Hitch debate about that's like nominally about the existence of God, and it's like, well, you almost get the sense that it's like the last thing this guy's interested in is actually arguing about the existence of God, right? Like he
That's
wants
the
to.
sense that you get absolutely from him. You know, it's almost like a detached pessimism, but it's
Hmm.
also a funny wit at the same time. You know what I mean? It's like the
Yeah, right. Like, so I remember there's this clip of his that I watched, I don't know, probably not many years after the debate itself, but it's from a debate that he did in Grand Rapids, Michigan, at like Grand Valley State University with his brother Peter.
Yes, I
Uh,
watched that entire thing. Brilliant.
yeah,
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah.
And it's it's like a two-part debate, which I didn't even realize until long afterwards, right? So there's part of it
Mhm.
where they're debating God, and there's part of it where they're debating Iraq, and
Yeah.
in so for me, there's a whiplash there about which where my sympathies lie, which brother between those two parts of the debate, but also
Yeah.
the clip I'm thinking of is his opening statement from the God part of the debate, and it's funny because to exactly what you're saying, it's very it's very rhetorically elegant, right? As he does,
Yes.
like maybe it's like the best version I've ever seen of like what he would do in these
Hmm.
debates. But there's also this sort of weird cheat code at the beginning where he sort of says, "Well, uh, you may, even if you can prove that that there is some sort of first cause or creator,
Hmm.
um, and I
The old
myself,
horse clause argument. Yep.
yeah, I myself think that there will always be more elegant and beautiful and compelling natural explanations, but even if you can
Yes.
prove
Yes.
that, yeah, exactly, even if you can prove that, then you still need to show that this God cares which holy days you keep and who you sleep with and what
Yes.
position and
Yes.
etc. It's like
Yes.
it's like and it's like the just the writing in that opening statement is
Hmm.
beautiful, right? I mean, he's like
He is, and he's not a sophist. He had a lot of substantive succinctness, to him.
totally
Um,
right,
yeah,
like
totally. I think. Oh,
but
go ahead.
I
I'm
was
sorry.
going to say on but like also if you're listening to that carefully, like it took me a couple times through it to realize this. It's like, okay, but wait a second, you just yada yada the whole part about whether or not there's a God, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like like you didn't actually say here's why I don't think that there's a good argument for this, or here's my argument against it, or anything like that, right?
Yeah.
You just kind of in this, like, again, this very elegant, very rhetorically effective way, you
Yeah.
just skipped right past that so you could get to the humanistic moral critique.
He had a way of like connecting with the ethos of the room and the people that his community. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think his best showing, I think, in my opinion, was him and Stephen Fry against the
Mm.
Catholic Church.
Yes. Well, because that was a better topic for him, I think, because
Yeah.
like I think as far as the religion debates go, at least the ones I watched, I think that one, that one might be the best. The probably the worst one is William Lane Craig.
Oh, that's. Oh, I was gonna say that. I'm so glad you said that because Williams coming from pure academic, rigorous philosophy, but it's a bit of gymnastics and stuff to make it all work. And then you got Hitch over there just being like, "Yeah, but this is ridiculous," and this is, and Craig's like, "That's not even what we're talking about." Yeah, man, I'm so glad you said that.
Yeah, and if you watch too, like if you watch that one, you can tell that Craig has really like done his homework because like he
Yeah,
in his opening statement, he's like, "Look, here are some things we're not here to talk about.
right.
The morality of the Old Testament, the this like,
Hmm.
and it's like he goes through all these things. It's like, yeah, clearly he knows perfectly well that Hitchens is going to try to steer it towards one of these things because these are
Hmm.
subjects on which he's on firmer ground. Whereas when it's
Hmm.
actually arguing, like it's when it's actually like analytically thinking through arguments for and against the existence of God,
Hmm.
Hitchens in certain contexts could do that a little bit. If you read certain chapters of God is Not Great, or
Yeah, I read that and Religion Poisons Everything audiobook, but
yeah, or like the intro to the Portable Atheist. It's like he could do a little bit of that when the occasion calls for it, but it's like he doesn't like, you can tell he doesn't like doing it on his feet, especially,
hmm.
and it's just not territory where he's super comfortable. Whereas that Catholic Church debate is the Catholic Church, a force for good in the world, with Stephen Fry versus uh, Ed
Archbishop
Whitcomb.
something. Yeah,
Yeah, there's like a archbishop. There's a Catholic archbishop from Africa. I don't remember which country,
yeah.
and there's this Tory member of Parliament, Ad Whitcomb, who's just like who's like a character that like
She
somebody
seemed
like
like super salty in that debate. You know what I mean? Like
yeah, she
super
was
salty.
totally yeah. It's like everything about the way she was presenting herself. It's like that. That's like that's like a character that like an atheist writer would like make up to like make fun of like somebody who'd be taking that kind of position. Just every
That's
time she was like oh people who attack the Catholic Church they can't stop talking about condoms, and like just the way she says the word condoms it's like
condoms.
it's like okay yeah.
That kills me, dude. I love that one. Yeah, I
But it's
think
like
that's it. Yeah,
it's a perfect debate topic for Hitchens because he could use all of his
rhetorical
historical
tactics.
knowledge, all of his
Yeah,
rhetorical tactics, and like he's not he's not arguing about metaphysics. He's arguing about like whether this institution has a good track record historically,
yeah.
and like and it's a very in a sense it's like a very easy case to prosecute. But I mean he
Mhm.
just does it with such incredible relish, like it's like it's like, oh, and I haven't even talked about Hitler yet, and like
Yeah.
yeah,
Yes, exactly. So many points of his were good, and then other times I was perplexed that he didn't say exactly what I wanted to. But I mean, that's the hitch. You know what I mean? Like you gotta love him for who he is. You
yeah,
want to
yeah,
get more into that? Like what was your conclusion?
sure.
What was the last part of the book called? The title?
Yeah, so the last part of the title is why he still matters, which is the part that's
There you
probably
go.
the least explicit in the book, since there's a lot kind of about the first two parts, and then the third is kind of mostly implied, that I think that there's that I obviously do think that there's something that's still very compelling here. And one thing that I say at the very end of the book is that even though I think like so like there's a certain chunk of it that's spent talking about the subjects where I completely agree with him. There's the like he wrote this trilogy of books in the 90s. It's kind of his hate trilogy. There's like one of them that's going after Henry Kissinger. Well, that was the last one. It was like 2001, I guess. Then there's one about Bill Clinton. No one left to lie to. And in between, and there's also the one that's like those two. I think people can sort of nod along. They can kind of see why, right? That there's the one that always shocks people, which is the Mother Teresa book,
Yeah, yeah,
called "The Missionary Position."
yeah.
Mother Teresa in Theory and Practice. Although I think he has her dead to rights.
Oh, he
And
has her dead to rights, bro.
yeah, he
Yeah,
does, right?
I agree.
Uh, but which is interesting too, because it's not like it's not a, um, like that book is not quite what you think it might be based on what he's doing later, because atheism, he's certainly an atheist, but I mean atheism is not like as much of an emphasis in what he's doing, back then. So it's not really an anti-religious or even an anti-Catholic book. It's an anti-Mother Teresa book. He's
No, it
concerned with
definitely is. You're right.
he
Um,
like he's focused.
he did
Yeah,
journalism and research for these books, right? In the '90s. I mean, he obviously did his
yeah,
homework. Yeah.
no, absolutely, right. He and yeah, I mean, so the part of that book that's probably the closest to what people might expect based on sort of new atheism era Hitchens is where he's debunking this like alleged miracle in Mother Teresa's House for the Dying in Calcutta, where like
Mhm.
the film wasn't supposed to be. Like Malcolm Muggeridge, who's a British journalist who wrote about this, said
Yes.
that the film they didn't even think it was going to be good enough to like have usable pictures from inside, but he said it was like bathed in like unearthly light, and then like he actually like talks to the photographer, and they're
Yeah.
like, yeah, like Kodak had just sent us some new film we thought it was worth trying, like that's that's yeah, it was good, it was a good film, right? Like that's
Yeah.
but
Right.
like but yeah, so it's like it's not really focused on it's not really focused so much on her theological beliefs as it is about her sort of lending her aura of moral authority
Hmm.
to these like death squad dictators like Duvalier in Haiti, and the sort of practices at these hospices where people were sending her money, kind of thinking that it was going to be spent on which she never said exactly, to be fair, right? That it was going to be spent helping these dying people in Calcutta, and it was really spent on missionary work, and like she actually didn't, she wasn't really using modern anesthetics because she thought that suffering made people closer to God.
And that is my problem with her, the big one, and that's why a lot of problems came about because of her actions.
Totally right. So yes, there's like part of the book that's spent talking about stuff like this, where I completely agree with him, which is like basically, honestly, like, up until maybe sometime in the 90s, practically everything. And then it gets a little bit more complicated. Then I think, especially after 9/11, there's like a political turn that I don't like. And there's like stuff that I think is good and bad about the new atheism years. But I think, but ultimately, one thing I say at the end of the book is, part of the, part of my agenda in writing this was that, like people who may, be younger, who might like, if they remember this guy at all, right? They basically remember, the last 10 years of his life, because that's the part that's plastered all over YouTube, for one thing, for sure. And so, it's like some combination of like these debates with priests and pastors, and the turn to the right on foreign policy issues. And I think that, so part of what I wanted to do with the book is sort of introduce people who might not be familiar with some of his earlier work, to this whole body of work for the first like 3 decades, of his writing and speaking. And part of what I want to do is grapple with, the stuff that I don't like, and sort of say, okay, how is it that this guy, I didn't want to sort of do the easy way out and say like, oh, he was just like, selling out because he wanted to go on CNN or something, right? It's like if you take seriously that these were conclusions that he arrived at in good faith, right? Like, then let's see if we can kind of reconstruct that and think about where his head was at and what he was thinking and all of that, and sort of try to more honestly grapple with that. And then, like, I wanted to just kind of see what sort of holds up and is sort of worth preserving in that legacy. But throughout all of it, the thing I said at the end of the book is like, I don't like, part of what I find valuable about Hitchens is that even when I'm reading the Hitchens stuff that I most disagree with, right? That like is where his conclusions are ones that I would like are furthest, from what I think. I never feel like my time's being wasted, right? In fact, like I feel like in this way that it's like, honestly, there are very few people I could think of who I would quite say the same thing about in the same way, right? That it's like, even the stuff that I most disagree with, like there's this way you sort of go through and you're reading it and you're like, oh shit, that's a really good point, isn't it? I have to think about that.
Yeah, he is that type of person. So you're kind of like psychologically and psychometrically like reverse engineering what he's going for, as a person.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, like I said, I think that as far as the stuff that I don't like, about the later politics, I think that it's a bad, I think it's a bad idea to just sort of say like, they're all like, most of the times people who agreed with me about stuff like that, right? So I am a very much a person of the left. I very much, was adamantly, opposed to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And nothing's happened since then has made me feel less strongly that that those were just like catastrophically awful, and so I do disagree with that turn that he took on those subjects in the last years, but I'm also very unsatisfied with a lot of the things that people who agree with me about that have said about it, because I sort of see a lot of kind of very cheap dismissals of those views, where people will sort of say like, oh, you know, it's that like I don't know, somehow he was like too into atheism and that made him Islamophobic, and like that's why he held his positions,
Mm-hmm.
or or again, it's just sort of like opportunistically like selling out for popularity or success or something,
Yeah.
or even like on the most extreme end, like I'll even see people suggesting it's like somehow he just like drank too much and that just sort of like
Mm-hmm.
and that just like and somehow somehow he just like I don't know if the idea is that like bottles of Johnny Walker Black should come with warning labels, like over excessive consumption may lead to neoconservative foreign policy positions. I don't really think
Yeah.
it works that way, right? I think that I think that you can.
What if it did?
Yeah, I mean, it'd be amazing. Wow, yeah, God, I have
No,
a
I'm kidding.
be real careful about that. That's
Yeah,
the
be
it's
very
like
careful.
you want to, yeah, you want to. You want a third whiskey? It's like, ooh, I better not. I don't want to. I don't want to support any invasions. Later on, right? So it's like I don't find any of that stuff convincing, and so one of the things I wanted to do in that part of the book was to say, well, it kind of if not that, then what, right? Like if you do sort of take seriously, and I think you should. Like in general, I kind of think that it's dangerous and kind of it's intellectually lazy in a way that can become dangerous to sort of assume that like we and just let's say whatever your views are, but just like the we of people who agree with me about all this stuff, like that, like we're just so obviously right that people are just like pretending to disagree with us, or that they have or that like anybody who does has like some sort of like super nefarious agenda,
Mm-hmm.
or
Mm-hmm.
like there's or whatever, right? Any of that stuff. It's like
Yeah.
I think that those are just all ways of not having to think very much about what motivates critics, or what motivates people who
Well, you
might.
said it. Intellectual laziness is a curse on America.
Yeah, yeah,
It's the
right,
scourge of our lifetimes.
totally, right. So I think that I don't I think that like there's some value in at least erring on the side of assuming that people are being sincere,
Yeah.
and that they don't have some super nefarious motive, and then just sort of try to think through. It's like, okay, well, how could somebody come to that conclusion? And is there anything you can learn from that? Even if like having sort of gone through that, try to put yourself in their head and thought through it. You could still say at the end of the day, yeah, I still disagree, but like they have but like I think you can learn something from the process of just uh, of trying to see things from the perspective of somebody who does come to fundamentally different conclusions
Yeah.
about these subjects, about things
Yeah.
that
Good.
really
Good
matter.
point.
You
Yeah.
know, um,
Good point. So we talked. You could say. I mean, you talked about what you agree and what you disagree, and why he's still relevant. What do you think Hitch would be like now? What do you think he would say?
yeah, I mean, so this is a little tricky. I mean, I think that and I want to sort of do the obvious caveat that like I don't know, nobody knows, right? But like
Right. Yeah. Not a mind reader.
but I'll play the game anyway, right? So I
Sure.
think that uh, I think there's a range that I find realistically imaginable. I mean, certainly. So, well, I guess let's do like politics first, and then like everything else, right? So they have
Sure.
so as far as where he came down politically, I think if you kind of think about where he was at different stages of his life, some of the ways he'd evolved in the last years and all that, I can see a range of possibilities, and it's pretty wide, but it's not like infinite, right? There's this stuff that I could definitely not imagine him thinking, right? So,
Yeah.
I think that at the sort of at one end of the range, right? There's what me, given who I am and what I think and where I'm coming from, what I would most like to imagine happening, right? Which is that like let's say, so he dies in December 2011, right? So let's say he'd lived for 5 years longer. If he'd so he'd live to see the 2016 election. Well, look, we know what he thought about the Clintons. He wrote a book about that, the No One Left to Lie To, which is actually a really good book, and it's a very it's like a very harsh critique of Clintons from the left about how bad like welfare reform was in the 90s, and the how the sort of the ways that like the sort of things that were done in the name of being tough on crime, and a lot of that stuff.
Oh yeah, all that kind of stuff from the 90s that was in some ways mistakes in my opinion, but I mean I'm
obviously with that, right? But it's like, so they have so we know what he thought about that. And in particular, the moment from 2016 that most made me think, like, okay, despite the fact that he definitely would have had some disagreements with Bernie Sanders on foreign policy, that like there is a scenario where he sort of finds his way back to the left and maybe supports Bernie in 2016, is there's a moment in the 2016 debates where Hillary Clinton talks about her trusted friend and advisor Henry Kissinger. And, I'm not going to try to do a Bernie accent, but they have Bernie says,
give me some more soup.
Yeah, exactly, right. It's, Bernie says, I'm very proud to say Henry Kissinger is not my friend, right? And it's like, okay, so given that this is one of the figures that Hitchens wrote like the most about and the most and with the most anger, right, about like his book about Kissinger is called The Trial of Henry Kissinger, and it's literally an attempt to sort of come up with the stuff that should Henry Kissinger ever be,
It's Henry's still alive, isn't it?
Yeah, Henry Kissinger is still alive.
Isn't that fucking ironic that he's alive and Hitch is dead?
that is definitely that is definitely evidence against the existence of a just God right there. But yeah, I think so it's like, okay, so it's like, I think in that moment he would have at least had some sort of like spark of sympathy. Would he have actually, been a Bernie supporter in 2016? Maybe, maybe not. Like I said, there definitely be disagreements about foreign policy.
Yeah.
It's possible that he could have gone, like, I don't think it's like stretching the imagination too much to imagine his domestic policy views evolving in a more like libertarian way. That could have happened, right? So maybe not, but maybe, right? So like from my perspective, the sort of best end of the possibility would have been there. The worst end from my perspective of the possibilities that I could imagine is that I could imagine Hitchens during the Trump era as kind of as sort of an insufferable resistance lib, like as somebody like, it's like, well, like you can just sort of imagine Hitchens sort of bombastically going on about Vladimir Putin or whatever. Like that also is not stretch the limits of the imagination, right? Like, so into like maybe even sort of Lincoln Project-y, like the kind of like sort of neocon people who are sort of super anti-Trump. Like, I think all of those things I can imagine, that whole very wide range that I just painted. One thing I will say is that I am fairly certain that Hitchens wouldn't have like, I'm 100% certain that there's like no scenario where Hitchens was like a Trump supporter, because
I don't think so.
I mean, for a variety of reasons. I just think that there's no phase of Hitchens' political evolution where he would have. I mean, for one thing, we have his actual comments on Trump. He has so there's once there's like a column he wrote for The Nation in 2000 when Trump was running for president the first time, the widely forgotten 2000 attempt to get the Reform Party nomination, where he refers to him as a nutball narcissistic tycoon. And there's also a time when he was on C-SPAN and Brian Lamb asked him something about Trump. And he's like, oh, God, do we have to talk about him? And he's like, the only thing that's impressive about Donald Trump that I've ever been able to figure out is that he's found a way to cover 90% of his skull with 10% of his hair.
That's good. That is so good. I've got one of my best friends on here, Don. Let's bring him in real quick. What's up, Don?
Let's do it. Yeah.
Oh, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Oh, there's the camera. Perfect. Just took a delay. Hi, Ben. It's nice Nice to speak with you.
Nice to speak to you.
I was wondering, where do you think Hitchens would stand on gender and transness?
I have no idea. I mean, I don't know. I'd be interested to hear what you think, but like, I could really see that going either way. Because I think that like you can sort of imagine, like it's not hard to it's not hard to imagine Hitchens, who, like, I think if we're being real about this, like if he'd like lived for another 10 years, right, he would have been canceled many times for many reasons, right? Some of them maybe
Yes. Yeah.
some of them may be somewhat justified, some of them totally unjustified, right? But like he would have weathered a bunch of those. And so given that, it's entirely possible. There's like a scenario where I could see him like, having undergone that enough times that he's just like incredibly irritated by sort of standard American progressives, and like he kind of wants to pick culture war fights with them, and like so he ends up having and there are people who are, I think, sort of somewhat in the Hitchensy sphere of who did this like in real life, right? And
Yeah.
so I can imagine him. So I could imagine him like it doesn't stretch the imagination at all to imagine like the Hitchens Vanity Fair article, or maybe they wouldn't have published it or whatever, the Hitchens, the ChristopherHitchens.substack.com article that was that where he's saying like anti-trans things. I could imagine that. On the other hand, I could also imagine him sort of viscerally reacting against against the sort of sense of the sense that of like he hated bigotry more than anything, in the sense that like a vulnerable group was being bullied, and I think that he could and also not for nothing, right? I mean, this is the it's also I mean, he was very he was very, very pro-gay rights, and there's
Yes.
some people see an analogy there. He has and obviously he hated the religious right very much, right? So like I could kind of see him like, I mean, if we're imagining it in like 2021 or whatever, he's still going around doing debate for pastors, and he might have stopped right by that, right? Like I could imagine him, just because people move on to other subjects, whatever, right? It's like they have it's like I can imagine him being like, doing the Hitchens style rhetoric of like moral contempt for like, why do you care so much, how somebody identifies or whatever. It's like,
he could definitely do that 100%.
Yeah. So
but
I could see both scenarios. I'd be curious what you think.
I do see both those possibilities, and I guess the reason why I pose this question toward you, as someone who's been, researching him and writing a book about him, and your philosophy background. What about the way that he thinks about like the world? About is there any glimpses into his ontology on issues, or his specific like political ideologies that he stands with, that kind of might inform us of how he would think today about issues if he was consistent?
Yeah, well, like I said, I mean, I think the gender one is one that I could see going either way, right? Like I think like even somebody like his friend Richard Dawkins, I think has a trajectory that might be a little bit like that first one that I sketched out, right? And I think that again, I could totally imagine the second one, but so the gender one is one where it's like I'd try to be a little bit careful about that and say like I'm just not confident, right, one way or the other about it. But there are other cases where I think that like sort of culture war kinds of issues that came up since he died, that like where I do feel pretty confident about what he would have thought. So like one of the big ones for me that feels super obvious to me is all the stuff about critical race theory and like laws to try to ban critical race theory from schools and all that stuff. And I think I actually wrote a article for the Daily Beast about this, where I basically said what I'm about to say about it, which is like I think there are two things that you can put together that like put together, I think, let you be pretty sure about what he would have, like, as sure as we can be, obviously, because the man's been dead for over a decade, right?
Of course.
But like as sure as we can be about what he would have thought about that, because like on the one hand, he is like extremely adamant about free speech, right? Like
Yes.
and very like there's a old Hitchens debate clip that I love where he's at is that like a university in Canada and he's and they're he's in debate about free speech, and he has like one of my all-time favorite Hitchens debate openings where he's the first word out of his mouth is fire. There, I've said it. Granted, not in a crowded theater. And he seems to he like looks around at this like university in Canada. He's like, I seem to have said it at the dining hall at Hogwarts. But and then he goes into the history of the phrase "shouting fire in a crowded theater," and how that was the actual context was the much overpraised Oliver Wendell Holmes doing a upholding the conviction of a group of Jewish socialists who'd been arrested for passing out anti-war literature during World War I. And the point that he's using it to make is what counts as a real fire and what doesn't, is you can't,
of course,
like you sort of can't trust people in positions of authority to make those determinations. And then you sort of think about those views, and then you put it together with the fact that like a lot of the stuff that's banned in these like anti-CRT bills is like sort of like, well, saying that like, American history is like bad and racist and, stuff like that. It's like, well, I mean, Christopher Hitchens was pro reparations. He actually did a, like even in the final decade of his life, I mean, there's a debate that he did on in like this like post 9/11. He wrote an essay for an anthology in the early 2000s, debated the issue, which so I think that like, given that he actually, he himself agreed with a lot of the views that were that were being, that would fall into like this sort of very, very vague umbrella of stuff that's described as, CRT or whatever, these laws. And also that like, I think just the idea of like sort of being perched over the shoulders of teachers to make sure that they're not discussing anything too divisive.
Interesting. Yeah. It'd be very interesting to see where he would go with that.
I would stake like that one. I mean, obviously I could be wrong. Obviously the man's not here to speak for himself, but I think that one would be one where I'd be much more confident that like, about what he would have thought.
Yeah. Sorry for forcing you to put a Hitchens hat on for a second.
No. I'm fun. I like it.
No, you're
it's fun.
I mean, I'd be happy to try, other ones, but they have I think that the big thing, like that's kind of alluded to earlier is I think as far as like the non-politics parts of like sort of post, hypothetical post 2011 Hitchens, what makes it a little bit complicated is like so much of those last years were defined by, the sort of, Bush and Obama era culture wars about religion, right? That's like so much that was going on. And then like but the sort of shape of American culture war just changed so much over the decade or so since then. I mean, like that there's and there is a reason why, even after like, there is a reason why, obviously, look, there'll always be people who be interested in talking about and arguing about whatever religion and atheism. I'm even one of them, right? But like I will say, but I think there was like a particular cultural moment in the 2000s where it sort of made sense to people to kind of form their like identity kind of around that set of issues that like, that because I think the combination of the fact that people had sort of religiously motivated Al-Qaeda style terrorism on their minds so much more back then than they do now, and the fact that like back in the 2000s, like you're sort of the sort of liberal anxiety about conservatives was less like what it is now, which would be like, oh, you're a racist, or authoritarian or whatever. All that might have been in the picture somewhere, right? But like really the primary thing was like, oh, you're like a theocrat who wants to, like teach creationism in the schools and, and force gay people back into the closet, all that stuff, right? But I think it's just like that cultural moment where it's like sort of banded together or just kind of on the basis of secularism as the big thing you identified about, I think is really past. I think that people have, that like people are just fighting about different issues and different configurations now. So like you look at the fact that somebody like Sam Harris went from being like one of the four horsemen of new atheism with along with Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins and Daniel Dennett to being somebody. I mean, I know people argue about how meaningful this label ever was, but like being in the IDW, right, the intellectual dark web. I
mean, we can also talk about, I think his main focus also running a meditation app today. So
yeah, that's true too, right?
Right. I think we can look at the trajectory of like his intellectual life and kind of where he is today is also really interesting.
Totally. But during that IDW period, right? It's like, look, I mean, the other people in the IDW, that includes like Ben Shapiro, who's
Dave Rubin.
And like Shapiro is like he's a religious fundamentalist, right? I mean, he's an Orthodox Jew who believes there can't be a Palestinian state because God gave the entire land to the Jewish people.
Yes,
that's it's it doesn't get much further from like four horsemen era atheism, than like hanging out with that guy, and so my point in saying that is not like necessarily an indictment of Harris or whatever. We can have that conversation, but just like
sure,
I think it's an indication of how much the battle lines shifted to other subjects, like even to the point
where
they
really did.
I mean, like, look, I know this is an exaggeration, but like the sort of joke I always make about this is that like the sort of the right wing evangelicals who love Trump, like Donald Trump could like do a speech in front of an inverted cross with like blood, and like satanic imagery, and as long as he owned the libs in the speech, the evangelicals would be fine with
it. Yes. Where do you have any like inclination? Because just speaking to you is making me think about this, about where this split happened. Like what if you can focus on something in your opinion of where this split really happened, this change, this shift occurred.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think a lot of it. I think it's kind of the two things that I mentioned earlier. So one is that part of the amount of public attention on religion and atheism that happened in the 2000s. Had to do with like for some people it was like one kind of reaction to like 9/11 and the war on terror and all that. The idea that there's like sort of the fear of like terrorism perpetrated by religious fanatics, I think helped people think a lot more, be a lot more focused on religion, and then and like he'll talk about how he like preyed on it before starting wars or whatever, right? That's like that kind of guy, right? So if that's the guy who's like the face of American conservatism, and then like I think that's kind of what people are reacting to, and they're on the other end of the culture war. I think that you get I think it makes more sense for people to be much more focused on religion in ways that's going to create more space for like sort of very prominent atheism and all that stuff. Whereas I think like, again, both of those issues I think have just radically changed, that the war on terror really doesn't feel the same psychic role for Americans that it used to. That it's not like terrorism has completely ceased to exist or whatever, but it's like it's just not something that people are focused on in the way they used to be. If anything, I mean, there's a like, if you think about like even the sort of most controversial foreign policy things in the last few years, none of them have really been about that, right? Like in any direct way, right? I mean, like instead we're arguing about stuff like, you know, like the confrontation with Russia over Ukraine and things like that are just different issues. And then so that's one.
Yeah.
And then I think the other thing is just that Donald, like Donald Trump era American conservatism is just a very different beast than George W. Bush era American conservatism, and I think it sparks different anxieties in Blue America, and like there are going to be different responses. That people like nobody, you know, like even though evangelicals are still a big right wing voting bloc, it's just not people. Religion is just not front and center in American politics in quite the same way in 2023 as it was in like 2003, and so I think for that, if nothing else, I think that you're just going to have people fighting about religion less and fighting about, you mentioned the gender stuff earlier, fighting about that, or fighting about, race, or fighting about, like any number of other things. I mean, post Bernie Sanders, like there's actually finally an element of American politics where people are fighting about what I would prefer them to focus more on, which is like economic inequality, right?
True.
Like
I would agree with that. At the same time, off topic of Christopher Hitchens. At the same time, I see a similar resurgence of this religion talk, especially with prominent movements like in the Daily Wire, their whole like biblical lecture series that has millions and millions of views.
Yeah. Right. Like this is something that I don't want to suggest otherwise. Like obviously in fact, this is something I even kind of say in the book that like there's this sort of way that sometimes I'll have conversations with people like on the left who I know through like media things who will sort of like the 2000s or whatever, but it's like now I just don't find any of that stuff interesting anymore. And there's this sort of too cool for school thing there. It's like, oh yeah, who cares about that, right? Whether there's a God and all that stuff. It's like, and that I kind of push back against that a little bit at the end of the book. It's like, well, really? Right? Because it's like, I think that there are some pretty basic things about being human that are like, what's the basis of morality? Does anything happen to you? Does anything happen to you when you die, or does your consciousness cease to exist? Like those are things that I think I sort of don't believe anybody who says they're bored by those subjects. Like that's like I don't know.
I think anxiety, there's such a big gap of knowledge, it's not even worth trying to entertain.
Yeah.
So they're bored of it.
Yeah, but I mean, it's like, so like, but even on like I mean, look, I think, I mean, I don't find that the least little bit boring. I have
I agree with you.
But and and I'm not surprised that like in that Daily Wire example you just gave, right? I mean, I'm not surprised that's very popular, but if I'm not mistaken, right, that Bible thing, that's the Jordan Peterson series there he's doing for them.
A bunch of different things that he's doing. He has a series, some Bible series. They have like a meeting down with like 11 people where they discuss religion and analyze different parts of the Bible throughout like the year.
Yeah, and so I mean, I would just point out that it's like it is interesting that it's like even though somebody like Jordan Peterson talks a lot about religion, that's not really what people are the most focused on in like if you sort of think about like what are the sort of most controversial things about that guy, or what are the things that like
it's not his religious takes, it's his takes on trans.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, hold you up. How you feeling?
I'm good. I mean, if you want to go for a few more minutes or whatever, I mean, it's up to you.
Sure. Let's talk about what you're working on now. What books you can you tell us what you're doing now?
Yeah, it's not a secret.
Yeah.
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 Uh,
Well, I didn't know there was some like publishing thing where you couldn't tell. Uh, yeah, whatever.
Now I am working on something completely different. So I am, kind of going back to, I mean, this is something that, has been kind of alluded to a couple times in the conversation, but about kind of the revival of an explicitly socialist left in the West. Then that what the book that I'm working on right now is a co-written book for Verso Books with Bhaskar Sankara, who's the founding economics professor, and it's called The Blueprint. And the point, the point of that book is to kind of try to think through, like, what a lot of socialists are very vague about, like what what where it's like
That's interesting.
People talk about, like, people are very focused on sort of like kind of reformist baby